Dobrodošli u drugo izdanje digitalnog propelera u sklopu festivala Slobodna zona. Ove godine je program osmišljen kao jednodnevni program sa 3 eventa, da kažemo. Prva 2 su u sklopu segmenta koji se zove Stanje u Evropi, tako da ćemo imati 2 master klasa sa 2 prikazivača / VOD platforme koji će objasniti kako se snalaze u trenutnom stanju u evropskoj kinematografiji sa promocijom evropskih filmova putem njihovih distributerskih kanala. I prvi master klas će biti sa našim gostom koji je već tu, Olle Agebro. Olle, I'm sorry, I just said your name and I apologize if I mispronounced it. Yeah. Yes, and Olle, now I will switch to English so we can introduce him properly. So Olle represents Draken Film. So that's the VOD platform, which is part of Gothenburg Film Festival. And that's the platform that was introduced already before Corona, so that they can have alternative distribution for the festival films. But then, of course, it made full sense during Corona time and now when they even further developed and advanced their services. So Olle will tell us more about that platform, how they work, how they function technically, but also in terms of programming and audience research. But the other focus of his masterclass will be the physical cinema theater. That's ARTHOUSE cinema theater in the town of Uppsala. That's the town in Sweden, and it's the only ARTHOUSE cinema in the region. In that town. And that was like all small ARTHOUSE cinemas everywhere. At some point, going very low with the audience. And Olle actually did some strategies for audience building and for promotion and audience research that turned this unsuccessful cinema into a very successful cinema that even got Innovation Prize in 2018 by Cinema Europa network of European independent exhibitors. Olle himself has a background in journalism and marketing and has worked with film festivals, cinemas, and distribution over the past 10 years. Since 2015, he has been a programmer for the Gothenburg Film Festival and head of acquisition of the festival VOD platform Draken Film, as I mentioned. He's also here in the capacity of manager of ARTHOUSE cinema, Fyrisbiografen. Excuse my Danish pronunciation of Swedish names, but you will mention the names during your presentation. And the floor is yours, Olle. Now you can share your slides, and I just want to mention that you can ask questions during Olle's presentation, so don't feel shy to interrupt him at any moment. And also there is an option to write questions in the chat. You can write it either in Serbian or in English, whatever you prefer, and then I will ask them on your behalf. Yeah. Okay. So we can.
I'll just share my screen and start the presentation. As mentioned, my name is Olle Agebro. I'm currently working at the Gothenburg Film Festival and with our VOD platform, Draken Film. But I've also got a background in exhibition and with the independent cinema, Fyrisbiografen. And I would like to speak a bit today on this topic on big data for small audiences, which is kind of a paradox, I guess, but I think this framework or way of thinking is crucial, especially for us as the independent exhibitors or film festivals or platforms. And I'll get into that in detail later on. And as Peter mentioned, I will sort of try to tie this together, both with my experience from the cinemas and also from working with our festival and VOD platform. It might seem a bit theoretical, but I think we'll get down to earth, so to speak. And as you mentioned, if you have any questions during the presentation, just feel free to interrupt or ask questions. First of all, I would like to thank Peter also for inviting me, and I would really have loved to be with you. It's unfortunately we haven't been able to travel for quite a bit and meet each other. I think that's really the best. And personally, a couple of years ago, I was visiting some cinemas in Slovenia at Kino Dvor in Ljubljana and a few other cinemas as well. And I learned quite a bit of the situation of independent cinemas in the entire region. And I think we share a lot of challenges, but also opportunities. And I really hope that we get to meet in person as well sometime in the future. But to get back on the topic on big data, I think this issue or this topic is really important for everyone working in the industry today. Over the past few years, I think we've seen such a rapid development with huge platforms such as Netflix and Amazon and Disney that really utilizes all of their strength and collecting data on their audience to make better marketing decisions, to guide production decisions. I think all of you recognize that every time you watch a new show on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, you can really sense the way that they have digged deep into their audience data to really produce these shows or films tailored to their audience needs. And what's quite weird actually is I think for companies of that size, they use data to make smarter decisions and to be more efficient. But since it seems like they have all the money in the world, they shouldn't really have to. But those operators or companies that would really need access to this kind of data are the independent ones, the independent cinemas and the independent platforms. And I think moving on and during the next couple of years, I think it's crucial for us as independent organizations to really understand how we can use data and how we can mine and share data with each other. And I'll get into some tactics and strategies for this later. But just to start with, I would like to talk a bit about Draken Film, which is our VOD platform at the Göteborg Film Festival. Just a bit of a background. Draken Film was founded in 2014 as a company, though this vision has existed in the festival organization for much longer. The Göteborg Film Festival is one of the oldest film festivals in Sweden, and it has been located in Gothenburg since the 70s and has existed as a festival in cinemas for 1 week per year in January for our local audience. But over the past few years or decades, perhaps, the festival organization has been thinking about ways to sort of expand both in terms of time, not only screening films only 1 week per year, but also geographically. And obviously the sort of vision has always been to be able to reach the entire audience in Sweden, and not only 1 week per year, but year round. And a few years ago, Draken Film became sort of the product of that vision. And we launched this platform with a very curated program, very much similar to the festival program, choosing films that mainly have screened at the film festival before, not only over the last few festivals, but we have also digged deep in the history of the film festival back to the 70s and picked films that has engaged our audience for the last few decades. And as of today, we have about 10,000 monthly subscribers, and they watch in total about 500,000 films every year. And this has increased quite rapidly over the past few years. When the pandemic started in February, March last year, we noticed that we quite quickly got an increased audience. We noticed that our current audience was also watching a lot more films than they used to, and because they were basically just staying in and didn't have access to going to cinemas. And we also, when we talked to our friends in the industry, we also realized that the cinemas had a really tough time with declining audiences. And in Sweden, even though we never had any strict regulations and cinemas was never forced to shut down legally, though they had quite hard restrictions. And when it was during the most severe periods the Swedish cinemas was only able to screen films for 8 persons per film or per screen, which is tough, of course. And what we did then back in March last year was that we launched a program and marketed as a way of supporting your local cinemas. And we partnered with the independent cinemas all over Sweden and offered them to tell their audience about Draken Film and the films they could stream on our platform. And for every new subscriber that we got, we promised to share half of the revenue with those cinemas. So this was a great example of how a digital platform such as ours and the exhibitors and the cinemas, the independent cinemas, could actually not look at each other as competitors, but rather as partners. And for those cinemas that were most successful in converting their audience into a digital audience, they got a quite substantial support from us, from that half of our subscriber revenue. And this certainly meant a lot for those cinemas, and of course also for us as a form. This way of cooperating between our digital platform and the sort of physical audience or the cinema audience is in part something that's been in our DNA since Draken Film was founded. As I mentioned, we are part of the Göteborg Film Festival and started as a sort of extension on the festival experience. And this means that we have always had access to the festival organization and the benefits of having festival programmers, the network of the festival. But what we've realized is that we also have had access to the festival audience, and perhaps more importantly, the festival audience data. So one example of this is perhaps compared to other VOD platforms that exist in Sweden. We, as I mentioned, we program quite a bit of the festival films that have screened at the film festival that we are then able to launch on our digital platform to the entire audience in Sweden. And when we make those decisions on what films to buy or to program, we actually have quite a good idea before launching them how they will perform by looking at films that we have screened at the festival, which films that were successful, and perhaps which films managed to reach certain audiences. We can make quite informed decisions on what films to pick. And as we have access to audience data from the festival, we also know what audiences to target those films to. Being a part of a film festival also means that we have had access to a unique network of sales agents and other film festivals, and basically the 40 years of experience of meeting the entire Swedish and part of the European industry. What we have also realized is that these insights from the film festival and how films perform during the festival is also something that's quite exclusive, and insights that really only we as a festival have access to, which means that if a film is a huge success at our film festival, we will really be the only ones that know of that, and it makes it possible for us to strike deals and perhaps offer more to the rights holders than they might have expected, or since they don't really have the Swedish audience data that we have. So those are just a few points on the benefits of sort of combining insights from a physical audience to a digital platform.
Well, just one question, if I may.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you mentioned that you collect data about the audience that attend your festival physically, and then you transfer them to the data that can be used for promotion of your films on the digital platform. But what kind of data? Is it just like the number? So do you just know which films sold the most tickets during the festival, or you also have some more sophisticated data about your audience, like, I don't know, their gender, or where they come from, or I was just curious.
Yeah, sure. So it's not like a perfect data set, because we allow our audience to purchase tickets from, they can either purchase them online, they can come to our cinemas, but in the most perfect audience is actually not only a ticket buyer, but also a member of the film festival. So they have purchased a festival pass and it's a member of the organization. And I think we sell about 30,000 member passes every year. And for that audience, we actually have a bunch of data, like both their name, their email, their street address. But then again, there are a number of issues with this as well, because it's quite common that our audience purchases tickets for their friends, and so it's not perfect data, but it gives you quite a good sense of how the audience behaves, and what the audience for each film looks like. Actually, I'll get into that a bit more. As I mentioned, we have this this member database for our film festival. But when we moved to, or when we started our digital platform, we realized that we actually do get access to lots and lots of data, and this is not just restricted to data on the actual audience demographics, such as age or as I mentioned, street address or whatever. But we can actually get quite specific data on how this audience behaves, and we can also map this data to certain other audience databases. Something that's quite efficient is to use tools like Google Analytics to get a sense of your audience interests or their related affinity groups, etc. But we can also get quite specific data on each film, and this was something that we realized was quite interesting during this last year when we moved our entire film festival online and streamed every film during the film festival on the same platform, the same digital platform as Draken Film. And when you just a brief description of how we did our online film festival. Instead of operating like a traditional SVOD or TVOD platform, where you perhaps would buy like tickets or rent a film for a certain time, we only sold festival passes that gave the audience access to the entire film festival. And then, like if the film festival had been screening at cinemas, we offered certain films only during a quite limited time period. So, for instance, some films premiered at 8 o'clock one evening and were only available for 6 hours. So we really concentrated the audience and forced them to watch a specific film during a very limited time frame. And this gave us quite interesting data on how the audience behaved. Perhaps most interesting was to actually look at how the audience watched the film when they paused or perhaps when they quit the film entirely. So one such example was the Swedish film Pleasure. It screened in Cannes last year. I think it's releasing now in Europe and in the US. I don't know if it has reached you yet. It's quite a provocative film about the porn industry, and this was one such example where we noticed that like 30% of our audience stopped streaming at a certain like 20 minutes in, when it suddenly turned into something that the audience really didn't expect. And I think that kind of data is something that you can't really get at a cinema or when you screen films to a physical audience, which is quite interesting. And I think that this kind of access to data gives you an opportunity that hasn't really existed before. If we go back to our film festival, we have been, as I mentioned, collecting data on what films each audience or each person sees, where they are located in Gothenburg, their name, their email. And then we have also, over the past few years, done quite a bit of interviews and surveys with our audience to try to really understand them. And over these past few years, we have been thinking quite a lot on why this actually matters, or what kind of data that is relevant for us in our when we are trying to improve our festival or our VOD platform. And just to give you a sense of this, the sort of the old way of building audiences or avatars or audience segments is to do interviews or surveys and try to map certain interests on certain audience groups. And to the left here, I just described a few of those aspects. I'm quite sure that you recognize that you perhaps think of your audience as for a certain film, we believe that women 60 plus that are interested in such and such, and they live in this neighborhood perhaps. And you can create quite detailed audience groups, and I think you can be quite successful in using these avatars to sort of get your mind around how to market a certain film or how to program them at your festival or at your cinema. But one of those things that I've been quite interested in for the past year or so is the potential of the digital data and how we can use that to actually improve this old way of thinking of audiences. And the data that we can collect from our VOD platform is much more specific, because it not only gives you or actually it doesn't give you any data on how your audience behaves outside the platform. It doesn't tell you if it's a woman or a man, the age or their income or whatever, but it only gives you data related to the actual film. And by mapping that data, by collecting information on which films certain audiences watches, their favorite genre or type of film, how they their like streaming behavior, what day of week do they watch film, or what time of day do they use their mobile phone when they watch certain kinds of films, or do they only watch films on their smart TV? Do they watch documentaries every Tuesday and drama films every weekend, and such and such. And I think by building this kind of audience groups based on actual data, you might find much more detailed audiences, and you will stop thinking of your audience as like a woman 60 plus, and instead start thinking of audiences in terms of what kind of films they are actually watching. Currently, we actually just a few weeks ago, we was granted support from the Swedish Film Institute to do a quite experimental project in this, where we will dig deep into our own digital data, and also see if we can combine these insights with sort of traditional data. And the goal of this project is to see if insights from a VOD platform or from streaming data can also be applied to independent cinemas, and to see if those insights are something that can be of use for independent cinemas as well. So this is really early stages, but I think this way of thinking is really similar to how those big digital platforms work. And I think this might be some kind of way to transform the Netflix way of thinking to ARTHOUSE cinemas. And even though this is a Swedish project, and I think some of these insights might be like local insights, if possible, I would be happy to share this with you at some point as well. So I will move into the next part of this presentation, but I would like you to sort of keep this in mind and think about your own cinema or your own audience, and try to think about what kind of data points or what kind of insights do you actually definitely know about your audience, and what kind of data actually helps you in your work when you market films to your audience, or when you program films, or when you are trying to improve your cinema. So just keep that in mind, and we'll get back to this question. We will now move from the digital platform into the actual cinema and the screening room, and I would like to talk a bit about our 100-year-old independent cinema, Fyrisbiografen, in Uppsala. Actually, it's 110 years old. I think yesterday was the 110-year anniversary. So I will talk a bit about this project that Peter mentioned in the start, that we also was awarded the Europa Cinemas Innovation Prize for. And I will speak a bit about how we used audience data to not only increase our audience, but actually improving our cinema going experience. And this also certainly led to an increased audience and increased revenue as well. Just a few words on Fyrisbiografen. It's one of the oldest cinemas in Sweden. It was founded in 1911. It has always been operating as an independent art house cinema. It started out screening European films, films by Fritz Lang, and yeah, you know, and it was operated as a family business for 3 generations. And back in 2012, the non-profit organization that I represented actually bought the cinema from the grandson of the first projectionist of the cinema. And when we took over, the cinema was in quite bad shape. It had a declining audience since the 90s, and we realized quite quickly that if we were going to be able to continue this 100-year-old history and to screen films to a future audience as well, we needed to increase our audience and increase our revenue quite fast. We had a few ideas on how to do this, but we started talking with a few consultants that had been working with similar challenges before, and we actually aimed at not increasing our audience by 100%, but we actually aimed at increasing it by 50, because that would be some kind of break even for us. And that kind of rapid growth is perhaps quite unusual in the independent art house sector. But if you look around, it's actually not that uncommon. If you look at other companies, if you perhaps look at those startups like Netflix or Tesla or Amazon, they manage to grow at this rate quite quickly and quite in a quite stable way. So we realized that if we were supposed to increase our audience in this way and grow at such a rapid speed, we really needed to stop thinking and operating as a art house cinema and instead start thinking as a digital startup. So one of those questions that we forced ourselves to ask was what actually differs a startup from art house cinema. And it's obviously a lot of things, but if you get down to the core, I think it's quite simple. A digital startup mainly has two focuses, and one of those is they talk to users. This is really the only way for a new company to know if they are doing something that's relevant. They need to get data on their audience and their audience needs, and why their audience would like to pay to use their product. And then they use that data that they get from their audience to continuously improve their product. And if you just focus on doing these two things, this is sort of a quick recipe for always being focused on what's most important, your users or your audience, and always being focused on improving the audience's most what they need the most. So based on this framework, we mapped out an audience strategy, and it's actually quite simple. We talked about how we wanted to increase our audience through a data-driven iterative approach, which means that every decision we make should be based on actual knowledge, on actual data on our audience or on our cinema. And when we do these improvements, we will constantly question ourselves, try to redo what doesn't work and do more on those aspects that we are successful with. So we started out with audience analysis. We talked to our users, we talked to our audience, we did surveys, we looked at our data, at our Google Analytics account, at our newsletter open rates, at basically every data point that we could get our hands on. And then we also did like an external analysis where we looked at how other cinemas all around the world operated, and also at how similar company, or not necessarily similar, but how successful companies operated. And those companies could be, like I mentioned, Netflix or Spotify or companies like that. And based on those insights, we listed a list of innovations or projects that we thought of as efforts that could really improve the cinema going experience of our audience. And we ranked these projects or innovation based on the risk, the investment needed, and sort of the our guess of the success rate of each sub project. And then we designed those sub projects, tried to perform them and test them in their most easy or simple simple edition. We try to measure the results of each project and try to learn from everything we did. And then we just kept doing this loop on every project. And just to give you a sense of what this could be, I will go deeper into a few more data or digital driven projects, but analyzing your audience and trying to come up with innovation can be quite complex, but it can also be really simple. So one of those examples was that in the foyer of our 100-year-old cinema, we had like a cute old box office ticketing sales stand, and in front of it was a glass window, which our ticketing sales personnel or volunteers was sitting behind. And this design looked quite cute, and it felt really in line with the sort of retro style of the cinema. But something that we realized when we analyzed the entire foyer and talked to our audience was that our audience couldn't actually hear what our personnel was talking about. When they tried to buy tickets, they constantly had to scream and say the title of the film again and again. And this glass window was, I mean, you could hear through it, but since we have quite an old audience, a lot of women, 60 plus, they had quite a difficult time to hear what our volunteers were talking about. And this in turn also meant that ticketing sales was quite slow. We constantly had quite a long queue in our foyer, and the audience got irritated about it. So one simple innovation was to simply fix this. And I guess you can do this in a quite complex way. You could probably build some kind of microphone speaker solution. But the most easy and the most simple way to test this hypothesis was to actually just remove that glass window in front of the box office. And we tried to measure the results in some way, and this was not like scientific, but we realized quite quickly that sales was going much quicker in the cinema. The queues were much shorter, and the audience simply didn't have to ask again and again and again about what our volunteers was talking about. So that was like just one example of a really simple way to like analyze your audience or your cinema, to try to come up with some kind of innovation, to test it in its most simple way, and to measure the results. And the idea of this is just to keep on doing this again and again and again. So what is actually a great cinema going experience? I don't know if you would like to give some examples from your own cinemas of what this could be. But we started out talking to ourselves, our volunteers, and also talking to our audiences about what it was that they really liked about going to Fyrisbiografen and going to cinemas in general. And we also, there has been quite a few studies in Sweden that looks at why the audience choose to go to the cinema instead of watching films on TV or at home. I'm quite sure that this could differ a bit between countries and perhaps even between cities. But some of those aspects that we listed was was to be able to watch films on a big screen. It seems like the audience like cinemas, the bigger the better. They really value that films are exclusive, that not only that it's an exclusive film that's only available in cinemas, but that it's an exclusive experience that they cannot get anywhere else. One of the most important aspects that we understood from talking to our audience is that going to a cinema is a social activity. So it's not only important to have like a big screen and great sound. It's also important to cater to the audience need to actually meet with each other, to have somewhere to sit before the screening starts, to have somewhere to go to after the screening, to continue the discussion of the film and really to continue the film experience. It's important to have great seats, easy to use ticketing systems. Our audience valued the curation of our cinema, the films that we pick to screen. They really like our engaged staff, that you can actually talk about film with our volunteers. They value the focus on the film, no distraction. We don't screen any commercials, etc. It's just focus on the actual film. And they also like to be part of an audience, part of a collective of movie lovers. So based on those surveys and those insights from our audience, we started to sort of come up with the aspects that could really make the best cinema going experience in Uppsala, in our local region. And we found like three major fields that we wanted to focus on. And we talked about this as the best screenings in a sort of technical way, in the best screening in terms of the films that we choose to screen. We talked about our audience engagement, the way we and our volunteers meet our audience and talk to them. And we also wanted to be the cinema that was easiest to use, engage with, and buy tickets from on digital platforms, since we knew that this was the way our audience was moving. And if we were able to achieve this, if we were able to create the best cinema going experience in Uppsala, we would increase the satisfaction of our audience. Our audience would return to the cinema more often, increased frequency, and this would in turn also lead to an increased audience in total. So this was basically the goal of the entire project. And I will get into a bit more detail about one of these projects and one of these innovations that we worked with. One of the most crucial ones was our website and our ticketing system. We realized that part of the reason that we had long queues at the cinema was that our website wasn't really working as it should. We didn't manage to sell that many tickets online, and we constantly heard from frustrated audiences that had issues with our ticketing system. And we had never really thought about this. We had purchased some kind of Swedish cinema ticketing system from a Swedish company that serviced a great number of independent cinemas, and we didn't really realize that we had any options to pick another system. But when we worked with our consultants and they looked at our website, they really highlighted that we had a number of severe issues. So I'm just gonna go back in time a few years and give you a brief guide to our website as it was back in 2016, 17, something. So it started with you landed on our start page where we displayed a number of films. For some reason, we used very small images and instead tried to put in as much text as possible on the first page. This was one of the issues, and they pointed out that most audiences don't really like to read. They simply know what they are looking for, and they would like to find it as fast as possible. We had a menu where you could find some sub-menus. The word biljetter is tickets in Swedish. And if you were looking to buy some tickets, you would probably click at biljetter. When you did, you landed on a page that simply had information on how to buy tickets. It said that you could basically buy tickets online or come to our cinema or call us. So someone that wanted to buy tickets online simply had to go back from this page and try to find another way to buy tickets. They got to a list of films that we screened currently, and perhaps the audience could click at one of those films that they found interesting. They then had to choose which time they wanted to see the film, click on a specific screening time. Then they got into an external ticketing system that didn't look anything like our actual web page. And even though they had selected a specific film and a specific screening time, they got back to some kind of ticketing system start page where they had to make all those decisions again, find the right film, find the screening time, and select how many tickets they wanted. When they had done this entire process, they got to a new page where they were prompted to log in. And if you were a first-time visitor, you didn't have an account before, and you had to create one. And we had this terrible system where you needed to fill in lots and lots of information, street address, zip code, information that we didn't use in any way, but that caused a lot of frustration with our audience. And when they had filled in all of these fields, they had to confirm their email address. And then when that was done, they had created their account and they could buy the tickets. At least they thought so, but instead they were thrown back to the start page of the ticketing system, and they had to go through this process again, though this time they were logged in and could buy the ticket. So for a first-time visitor, buying a ticket at our cinema was a 20-step process, and we lost so many visitors during each of those steps. And we started talking to our to the company that ran this ticketing system, but realized quite quickly that we needed to replace it entirely. So the way it works right now is that you simply go to our start page, you click on the film that you would like to see. We use big images because that makes it much more convenient and easy to use. You click on a film, you get straight into the ticket system where you choose how many tickets you want, and you can fill in your payment details right away. So we basically cut this 20-step process to a 2 or 3-step process. And this, I think that this, if we just would isolate this innovation, I think this accounted for perhaps 30% of our increase in audience. Another detail in this is that before we started this project, we allowed our audience to both book and buy tickets. And a lot of our audience booked tickets because our ticketing system was terrible and they didn't want to fill in their payment details in it and preferred to pay when they got to the cinema. And this meant that even though we had a fully booked screening, perhaps 20% of our audience wouldn't show up. So by restricting our ticketing system to only offer ticket purchase, they are not available to book anymore. I think that also increased our audience quite a bit. I will continue a bit on the way we have worked with digital tools to optimize our audience. And this is just a frame from the Facebook Ads Manager. I don't know if how many of you that use digital advertising or Facebook advertising, but this is such an easy way to not only get cheap conversions or cheap sales, but it's also a great way to learn more of your audience and to actually get data back from your audience by advertising to it. And I will just briefly describe how we have worked with digital advertising. So one of the insights that we had during this project that I think this came from a report that the Swedish Film Institute did, where they looked at when an audience made a purchase decision, they looked at for how long these audiences had been aware of the film or had been thinking about watching this specific film. And they found out that from the first time that you hear of a new film, it usually takes about 4 or 5 weeks before you're actually ready to make a purchase or to ready to actually go to see the film. And this was quite interesting for us because the way our marketing worked before was that we simply programmed our films. When the film premiered, we emailed our audience and said that this weekend this and this film premieres, and it screens at this and this screening. And if we were to actually believe the result of this survey or this report, that would mean that from the time that we told our audience about our films, it would take perhaps 4 or 5 weeks before they actually visited our cinema. And the way we program films, we screen perhaps 100 or a few hundred films per year. 4 or 5 weeks after the premiere, we usually have to remove the film from the cinema and make room for new films. So instead, during this project, we revamped our entire marketing strategy. Instead, created this sort of 3-part process where we started advertising for films about a month before the premiere. And the only thing we did was that we created a video ad, a trailer ad with the specific film's trailer and a short description of it, and where we sort of just communicated that on this date this film will premiere at our cinema. And we advertised these ads to a quite broad audience. And during this 30-day period, we collected the engagement of our audience and saved that engagement in a separate group. So this is the way digital advertising in general works, but specifically advertising on Facebook, where you can create new audience groups based on how they react to your advertising. So in this case, we perhaps wanted to create a new audience group of every audience that have watched, say, 10 seconds of the trailer for Cold War in this case. And then during the week of the premiere, we created a new ad where we didn't want to communicate the date of the premiere longer, but now we wanted to focus on the purchase decision. So we retargeted every audience that had seen perhaps more than 10 seconds of the trailer that we knew had some kind of interest in this film. And now we retarget a specific audience and try to make them actually purchase tickets. And this usually worked quite well, but this also meant that when the audience had purchased, we had another data point that could be highly relevant for our marketing, because we knew that if a specific audience had bought a ticket for instance, Cold War in this case, we knew that they might be interested in period film, perhaps artistic black and white films, perhaps in this case, films about jazz or something. So every time we screen a new film that in some way relates to a previous one, we have great warm audiences that we can use to retarget to, and in that way increase the frequency of every audience at our cinema. I would just briefly like to go into a little bit more detail about how we have done this in a specific case with this Swedish film by Ruben Östlund, The Square, that won the Palme d'Or a few years ago. So what we do in that first create awareness phase is usually that we don't only create one ad, but perhaps we create 3 or 4 or 5 ads with a quite similar message. Perhaps we try a few different ideas. Perhaps we try to emphasize that this is a Palme d'Or winner, or perhaps we emphasize certain aspects of the plot. we might try to use the trailer from the film or certain clips, or perhaps just still an image from the film. And during this 30-day period where we try to create awareness for the film, we constantly measure how these different ads perform. And we look at a bunch of different numbers. Perhaps most important are CPC, cost per click, how much we pay for each click that an audience makes on our ad, cost per video view, and CPM is cost per 1,000 users reached. And by looking at these numbers, we get really valuable insights on what parts of this film that actually resonate with the audience, and we can use this to continuously improve our messaging, our targeting, and also understanding what specific messages works with the specific audiences. And then when we move from the create awareness phase to the conversion phase, we usually have a quite efficient message that we can send to our audience. So by using this data-driven approach to marketing, we've not only cut our marketing costs, we've also managed to reach new audiences and also get our audience to come back to the cinema more often. And just some background around this, we used to advertise in the local newspaper in print. This was quite expensive, and we weren't able to measure the results in any way. In order to finance this digital project, we actually stopped advertising in print, and we took the entire old print budget and moved that online, and we certainly saw much better results from this. Another data point that was quite interesting was where we looked at our different screening slots and at what time our audience preferred to go to the cinema. And this was shocking in some way. I had imagined that we perhaps could find like the ideal time to program films. What this showed us was that the best time to screen films was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and this was quite unexpected, but it turns out that one of our most engaged audience groups are retired women that have time to watch films in the afternoon, and basically many of those screenings are packed, but this site didn't really give us that much information on how to actually increase our audience. We can't screen more films at 3 o'clock than we already do. But when we crunched these numbers and looked a bit deeper into it, we realized that it was quite a big difference between what kind of films we screened at a different time of day. And we realized that like 8:30, 9 o'clock, which was actually quite bad screening time in general, actually was a great screening time for certain films. When we programmed films that were targeted to a younger audience, our student audience, we had great numbers on those screenings. So this is just one other example of how you can use really easy to access data. You just compare tickets to your screening times and try to understand what films works best at what time. And I really would like to emphasize that you have to do the math and actually list the numbers side by side, because at least we had so many ideas before on what worked best on what time, and when you do this these calculations, you always find interesting insights and often shocking insights as well.
Sorry, just one comment.
Yeah.
Last year, actually, we had a very long masterclass of 4 hours, actually, with Nuyet Noyanova from Groovy from Copenhagen. That's a digital marketing company. So she gave like a very long presentation about this kind of digital optimization for every audience campaign for films. So I just wanted to say that it's available on our YouTube channel, Slobodna Zona YouTube channel. So if you want to know in more details about how all this system functions of targeting audiences digitally and through Facebook ads and social media, you will get a lot of information there during her lecture. Yeah, sorry for interrupting. I just thought it was perfect moment to mention that.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And actually, Groovy is like best in class when it comes to using audience data and working with really specific targeting. But one thing that I would like to stress is that though it's, and certainly for us, it's been great to work with experienced digital consultants. I think that to a great extent, you can really use the data that you already have, and you don't necessarily need to work with expensive consultants or expensive tools. You can create a lot with tools that you already have, or with without even spending lots of money, you can get really great insights from ads tools such as Ads Manager in Facebook. So these were a few examples of how we use the digital data to actually improve the way we transform our potential audience into an actual audience or into moviegoers. But we also thought quite a bit about, since we are cinema and the actual cinema experience isn't that digital, or isn't that big data compatible. Are there anything that we know about our audience that we can actually use to create better experiences while the audience is at the cinema. And this was perhaps the most transformative and important realization for me, at least, that even though we spent lots of time and money to collect data and to understand big data and to implement data sets into our different digital tools. Perhaps the most important one was the realization that we can actually use that exact same framework when we are working in our physical cinema. So if we go back to that idea of constant iteration of you remember that example of the glass window in the foyer. If we can find those specific physical examples at our cinema, but approach them with the digital framework. So I will just go into a few of these examples, how we sort of use this framework to actually improve the way our audience experience the cinema. One of those, and I would like to get your attention to the image to the right, which is one of our most popular screening concepts as of today. It's we call it knitting cinema, and this came from an idea that appeared in one of the interviews with our audience, where we talked to one of the old ladies that usually go to our cinema, that mentioned that she often get a bit restless, or she gets while sitting in a dark cinema, she feels like she aren't doing anything productive compared to when she watches films at home. She always has her knitting in her knee. She knits like sweaters or socks or whatever, and while she watches TV or films on her TV, she feels productive in a sense. And it's also for that specific audience, I think knitting is meditative, and it simply feels like home to be able to knit while you are watching films. So we sort of tailor-made screening concept for that specific woman, but we realized quite quickly that if we marketed screenings as knitting screenings, where we keep the lights lit low, and where we serve coffee before the screening, and we allow audiences to talk a bit before the screening and after it, we would attract a certain kind of audience, and they perhaps most importantly, this audience felt that we had created something specific for them. And this is just one other example of how we sort of collected data from our audience and then tried to lift that data into our actual cinema and our screening operations. We use that framework to tailor certain screenings to other audience groups as well. So we, for instance, we have created like a documentary club for audiences interested in socialist issues and documentaries, where we always invite a guest that speaks on a certain topic before and after the screening, and just trying to find really specific audiences and create movie-going experiences that are specific to them. And when we have created these like concept screenings, we have a framework where we try to tick a few boxes where it's important that it's really communicative and really exciting concept to this specific audience even before they have visited the cinema. It should be easy to talk about so that the specific audience tells their friends about it. It's also important that we really deliver, that we really create the best possible experience for that specific audience. And we also would like to find some way to make the audience carry this experience with them afterwards. So in the knitting example, it would be, well, very specific. They will always remember the socks that they have knitted in our cinema that they carry with them. In our kids' screenings, it could be the balloon that the kids are carrying with them from the cinema. And we have also like moved this into outside of the cinema, where we, on the image to the left, we created a podcast for the cinema as some kind of way to stay with the audience and continue the conversation about the films with our audience even after the screening has ended. You were holding your hand up, Peter.
Yes, yeah, I did it. I didn't want to interrupt you in the middle of the sentence. No, I was just curious, and I think other people asked me to ask you what is, because the titles you mentioned, like The Square or the Cold War, they're sort of popular or mainstream art house films. I mean, they're still art house, but on the other hand, they went really well in cinemas and earned a lot of money. Yeah. So I was just curious, what is the balance between this kind of, so to speak, mainstream art house and like total niche art house films you curate, and does it, do kind of audience building and audience design strategies differ a lot between these two types of films?
Yeah, I think it's the relation is pretty much 80-20 one, where perhaps 20% of the films that we screen are like popular art house films, and they in turn generate perhaps 80% of our audience numbers. But I would say that when you count each title every year, I would say that perhaps 80% of the films we screen are really niche ones. In terms of the way we market those films, I wouldn't say that it differs a lot. I still think that the 30-day rule and the way of creating awareness is relevant for really niche films as well. Though the difference would be that you usually spend a smaller budget on a niche film, and you usually create a much more specific audience. So perhaps for a niche film that we are currently screening, we would perhaps limit the audience by adding a few interest filters, adding filters for age, adding a number of filters that will make that specific film more relevant. But then again, since we over these past few years have built up like a database of warm targeted audiences that we can use to retarget our message to, for many of the niche films, we have previously screened a similar one that we can sort of reuse that audience to retarget to the new film. So I think that's probably the, for us at least, the most effective way to remarket or use retargeting to actually get a substantial audience to very niche films as well. So I would just like to summarize a bit of our strategy into really 5 aspects that have been the most important ones. So first of all, as we just spoke about, the data-driven marketing, the way we have used actual insights about our audiences and retargeting groups to invest our marketing budget in a smarter way. We also revamped our website entirely, tried to make it as conversion optimized as possible. This was in part by reducing the required steps for actually purchasing a ticket, but also the entire structure of the website, the emphasis of images rather than text, etc. During this project, we also improved our screening rooms quite a bit. We bought new chairs, we installed a new sound system in both of our screens, and really tried to make it the best possible screening experience in Uppsala. And we also tried to really align the entire staff of the cinema and all of our volunteers to really be passionate about this goal to increase our audience, and also to make them passionate about allowing each audience to experience the film in the best possible way. And we have also greatly expanded the number of films that we screen, and we try to find the, even if it's a really, really niche film with perhaps a potential audience of just 20 persons in Uppsala, we would like to find those 20 and really make them watch the film. In another way, when you dig deep into the data and analytics, and suddenly everything just turns into numbers and math and statistics. And I started to think about the way we grow our audience in a similar way. And I made this math formula about it, where I think of it as D minus T equals X, where D is the demand for experiences of film, of our cinema. And by increasing that as much as we can, by improving our marketing, by choosing better films, by finding the right audience for each film, and also by decreasing the thresholds, by removing that glass window in the foyer, by making the website more easy to use. In turn, we will get the number X, which is the result of the demand for films that we managed to create and the thresholds that we managed to remove. And the average number of films seen by a Swedish audience in cinemas is 1.7 films per year. And I think this is really low, and I think this the only reason for this is that the Swedish film industry or the Swedish cinema industry hasn't really understood the fundamentals behind cinema going. And I think that if we as independent cinemas can just focus on these aspects, I'm quite sure that we can increase the number of admissions significantly. So I think I'll stop there, but if you have any questions regarding anything that I've talked about, or anything else, actually, you're feel free to ask them. And of course, if you come to think of anything later on, I'm always available. Just please email me.
Okay. If there are no questions, I would just like to ask to go back to Draken Film, and also something that a lot of people asked me is how actually expensive it is to run. What are the operating expenses when you run the platform? So like, what is how is it difficult to choose the platform provider, and then you need to give part of your revenues back to the distributor or to other copyright owners? And so like, how realistic is that you open ARTHOUSE VOD platform and that it gets and that it becomes a sustainable business model that will actually bring you some money, not just rely on subsidies or help from public film funds or stuff like that. Yeah. So if you can just reflect a bit on that.
Yeah, I think it was completely unrealistic when we started out, like 5 or 6 years ago. It was very expensive. It was really challenging from a technical standpoint. The industry wasn't really ready for it. It was really hard to negotiate deals with distributors and sales agents. But I think everything moves really fast, and especially after the pandemic, I think that things have really changed. Both on the one hand, it has become much cheaper to operate from a just traffic and data standpoint, it's much cheaper to host Amazon Web Services server today than it was a few years ago, and also it's much easier to negotiate VOD agreements with distributors and rights holders. For us, I think it wasn't until we had like 5,000 subscribers, which would mean like an income of perhaps 500,000 euros per year, before it was a sustainable business. But once you sort of reach that point of break even, it's much easier moving forward. So I think it's probably difficult for a single cinema or for a really small film festival to start something like this. But if you either could cooperate in some way, or if you could perhaps program films as part of an existing platform, I think this could be really valuable for like a physical operation, as it not only would give you some kind of passive income or recurring revenue, but it would also give you access to, I think, really valuable data that can help you to transform your cinema business as well.
Yeah, so I think that was the most important thing I learned today, is that actually you get completely new data by running VOD platform that you can use for whatever. You just get new insights about the audience that's universal. Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, but thank you. So we are running out of time now. We're actually approaching lunchtime now. But yeah, I just want to thank you. This was a really nice way to learn about innovation in a very simple way, and actually shows how by doing small things that most often do not cost money, you can actually achieve a lot. So I think that was the main takeaway for me, at least. I hope also for the participants. So thanks a lot. You are all welcome to contact Olle if you have any questions via his email. Email can be found now in the chat room. And yeah, thank you, Olle. We will stay in touch anyway. We're now moving for a lunch break, and then at 1 o'clock we will have the second masterclass with Katarzyna. Yes.